Today, I'm going to talk about what I think gi grapplers can learn by training no-gi more often. Hey everybody, my name's Paul Federici. I'm a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under PJ O'Sullivan. I train out of Pura Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu Academy in Hamilton, Ontario, as well as Parabellum MMA in Oakville, Ontario, and I'm here today to answer some of your questions. If this is the first time you've been to this channel, please take a second to click the subscribe button below, and if you're already a subscriber, please take a second to click the bell icon next to it, turn notifications on, and you'll get a message every time I upload a new video. Okay, so I have a question here today from Let There Be Justice. And Justice asks, what can gi grapplers learn from doing no-gi and vice versa? That's a great question, Justice. Thank you so much for reaching out to me and asking. This is an interesting topic. I think the gi versus no-gi debate always rages on. It tends to get people pretty fired up, myself included, especially around ADCC time when people proclaim that no-gi is not Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I think there tends to be a sentiment in the jiu-jitsu community that no-gi is somehow just a wet, sloppy mess and it's not technical, and somehow gi jiu-jitsu is pure and more technical and more valued somehow, and I couldn't disagree more. So this is a cool topic to dive into, to at least share some of my thoughts on some of the lessons that can be learned doing both, and I do believe there are lessons and value in doing both styles of jiu-jitsu. Let's assume we take somebody that literally has never done no-gi in their life, and all they do is train in the gi. So let's bring them to their first no-gi class, and what are they going to see and what are they going to learn? Well, first and foremost, what they'll notice right off the hop, obviously, is there's a severe lack of friction because there's no gi, there's no fabric, and there's also not as many grips that are obvious and readily available. Okay, so this means basically that they're going to have a harder time making connection with their opponent and slowing their opponent down and solidifying position. I think generally that tends to mean that pinning your opponent, establishing and controlling a position, as well as submitting them, becomes much more difficult, okay? Obviously, no-gi tends to be more slippery, so your opponent can move a bit more freely, and I think that that generally tends to result in people that train no-gi having a bit more of a sense of body awareness, how to really position their body, and truly learn how to eliminate space, okay? So I find a lot of people in the gi tend to rely on what I call just sort of arbitrary grips, meaning that it's not necessarily a strategic grip, or there's not necessarily a lot of thought behind it, but they can just reach out and grab almost any piece of fabric, and suddenly you can significantly slow your opponent down. And if you're in side control or mount or any of these positions, back control, you can hang on to pieces of fabric that really restrict mobility. Sometimes I think it gives people a false sense of control in that they're not completely eliminating all the space that's available. It's just easier to escape generally in no-gi because it gets slippery and sweaty, so this tends to result in no-gi students having better, tighter body position and control, better awareness for when space opens up and shutting it down, and I do think more refined technique when it comes to finishing their opponents. The other thing that, a coach that I have, Rory McDonald, always says that he actually argues that grips are more important no-gi than they are in the gi because there's fewer of them. And I really tend to agree with that because, as I mentioned, sometimes people in the gi rely on arbitrary grips. There's times when I'm playing, open butterfly guard or some sort of open guard against a bigger, stronger opponent, and they can just reach out and grab any part of fabric on my leg, and suddenly my mobility is significantly reduced. And you don't have that luxury in no-gi. And in order to control and isolate limbs on someone in no-gi, you have to be more strategic and far more accurate, I believe, with the grips that you do decide to use, because you can't just reach out and make contact and expect it to have any meaningful impact on your opponent. The other thing people tend to notice, obviously, is the speed is different. So no-gi tends to be faster, again, because of the lack of friction. And I like to say, because I used to like to play poker a lot back in the day, so sometimes I like to say that, no-gi is like playing speed poker. You're going to see more hands per round, so to speak, meaning that you're going to see more positions and scenarios play out in a typical 5, 6, 7-minute round than you will in a gi match, where it tends to be slower and more methodical. And so sometimes people say, oh, no-gi is just, it's spazzy, it's too fast. And my argument to that is I just don't think people are recognizing the speed at which situations are changing. And so no-gi grapplers, I do believe, develop the ability to problem solve at a faster rate because they have to, because things change more rapidly, okay? I think because of the speed in no-gi as well, people will become more adept at scrambling. Scrambling tends to be when you're kind of in a neutral position with your opponent. You're both struggling to either establish or maintain position. You learn to be comfortable in the chaos sometimes, and I think that having the ability to kind of move quickly in these kind of more neutral fights for a dominant position is really important because, again, that's something that can happen regardless of whether you're wearing a gi or not. So another big skill that you can develop is your ability to scramble in and out of positions. I also think that when people start to train no-gi, they're going to learn a skill set that I believe is universal in that it's a transferable skill set. So what do I mean by that? Well, whatever you do no-gi, you can also then do in the gi, but you can't say the same the other way around. For example, you can't learn how to use spider guard or de la hiva with a lot of grips and take the jacket off and do that. There are some modifications, but it just doesn't work the same way. But if I learn to use an overhook and a collar tie and underhook, I can do that in the gi as well. Obviously, some modifications need to be made, whereas a lot of more modern players in the gi now, I think they're becoming so dependent on their grips that when they take the jacket and the pants off, suddenly their ability to generate offense, finish opponents, and do all the things that they're good at suddenly diminishes significantly in no-gi. The second thing I think that's more prevalent in no-gi is the influence of wrestling. And so I think that the ability to learn takedowns is incredibly important, and I think that it's something that's generally neglected to a certain degree in the gi community. And this isn't a knock on anybody. I think it's just the way that the sport developed. It's more focused on the ground. I know that the gi has more of a connection to judo, but I do think that takedowns are not as emphasized because pulling is a bit easier. I could pull guard in the gi with my grips and find myself in a very offensive and effective position right away because I'm able to establish grips standing, and that's not available in no-gi usually. I can get a wrist control and whatnot, but sitting to my butt is more risky because I don't have good connection. So I think that a lot of people that train no-gi tend to have better takedowns, or at least they're more exposed to really effective and efficient techniques. I've been training with wrestlers regularly for the last few years. I feel like I've learned a lot more in terms of effective takedown technique than I have in probably 10 plus years in the gi. And again, it's not a shot at anybody or anything. I think it's just the emphasis that's placed on it is different in the gi. And I think a lot of the techniques that are taught in the gi in terms of especially single leg and double leg, ankle picks and that sort of thing tends to be lacking. There's a lot of details that are often missing. And I think you need high-level instruction with takedowns in order to fill those holes, because I find people learn subpar technique, and then they go to shoot a double or a single, and they get sprawled on, and they say, man, takedowns suck, I don't like them, and they go back to pulling guard. Whereas if they'd spent more time focusing on wrestling and takedowns and learning how to do them effectively and efficiently, I do think you'd see more people being more effective with takedowns. The other thing is wrestling is incredibly difficult. It's probably the most grueling sport maybe in the world, and I think it's a great opportunity for grapplers to develop more physicality on the mats, for developing more mental toughness, for developing more resiliency, and more importantly, developing great conditioning and cardio. I get people all the time that ask me, how do I get my cardio up? How do I have more stamina on the mats? How do I get better and not gas out in tournaments? Is it this diet? Is it a kettlebell routine? Is it sprints? Is it high carb? Is it low carb? All those things have a place, but one of the single biggest things that I've found that's helped is doing more wrestling. There's nothing quite as physically demanding and grueling as having two people just grinding out takedowns, trying to get each other on the mat. And then as soon as you get a takedown, you pop back up and do it again and again and again. And there's really not a lot of room to rest. And sometimes I think on the ground, I'm as guilty of it as anybody. I find, pockets and opportunities to rest. And sometimes you do it on the ground and you don't even realize it. And I think in wrestling, there's less opportunity to do that. You're going to get pushed harder. You're going to get more physical. You're going to get more competitive. That's one thing that had a massive impact on my conditioning and helped me have the best competition run I ever had in my life in 2019. Every time I would get closer to a tournament, I would make sure I would do more and more rounds on the feet for working for takedowns, even if it wasn't necessarily my strategy in the tournament. I just liked going in knowing that I had pushed myself and that my conditioning was really high because I put in the work. The other thing I think that's really important too is I think grapplers really need to be able to develop the ability to dictate where the fight takes place. So you may never become a great takedown artist, but if all you're ever used to doing is pulling guard, I think that's a detriment because you might come up against somebody that if you had a takedown game, you could have easily beaten a tournament. And I just think the more options you have on the feet and the more confidence you have, the better you're going to be overall. The other thing that's really important that I think somebody that comes from the gi world to the no gi world will notice is that there's more openness towards leg locks. And trust me, you don't want to be the person that's been training for, 10 or 15 years, you get a brown or a black belt, and you realize that you have a white belt level skill on the ground in terms of heel hooks and knee bars and calf slicers and all these sorts of things. And believe me, that's not just, I'm not making that up. I've seen that happen. I've seen it happen to a lot of very skilled grapplers. They take the jacket off, they take the pants off, they start rolling with heel hooks and leg locks, and they're lost. And and that's fine. If that is you, that's no problem. I mean, I started getting into leg locks as a brown belt. So I say it from experience, try not to be that person. And I think what you'll notice is that even though you may know and be familiar with some of the guards that they're using in no-gi, like De La Hiva, reverse De La Hiva, butterfly guard, the thing is that a lot of times people are using these guards in ways that you're not used to. So for example, you might be used to somebody playing reverse De La Hiva in the gi. And what are they going to try to do? They might try to sweep you. They might try to do Kiss of the Dragon and get to the back. But in no-gi, you're going to see people starting to use it to enter into the saddle, starting to heel hook. And if you're not used to that, trust me, it's going to catch you by surprise and you're going to be behind the 8 ball. Don't be the person that's left behind and doesn't understand these things. So I do think that people that train no-gi more are more open to leg locks. They see them earlier in their jiu-jitsu career and they become more comfortable and confident with them earlier and faster. The last point I'll say about things that someone from the gi world can learn from the no-gi world is I do feel like the culture tends to be a little bit different in the no-gi world. And why I say that is because most of the time, modern no-gi tends to be more associated with MMA gyms. And in my opinion, MMA gyms have a truer litmus test for techniques. And what I mean by that is, in MMA gyms, their sort of status is winning a fight. So they want to know what's going to be the most efficient and effective technique. They're not worried about whether it's traditional or not traditional, or whether a certain culture likes it or dislikes it. They have a more pure sort of litmus test in that they just want to know what works. And sometimes I feel like in the gi world, their litmus test or their goal, so to speak, is to win IBJJF tournaments. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's totally cool. I'm all for that. I just think that if you're only looking at a particular rule set, it's easy to lose track of sort of modern evolutions in the game that maybe are just taking place in the submission-only world. And we shouldn't just have one body, in my opinion, that sort of dictates what jiu-jitsu is or isn't. So I do like that the MMA/modern no-gi community tends to be a bit more open-minded with certain techniques, whereas some IBJJF-oriented gi gyms tend to look at them through the lens of, well, traditionally we haven't used that, or this culture or that culture frowns upon these techniques. Because I think ultimately what made and continues to make jiu-jitsu great is that spirit of innovation and adopting techniques that work and are effective and efficient. And so sometimes I think politics and tradition can kind of get in the way of that. And so sometimes in the no-gi community, I do feel like they tend to be a little bit more open-minded with that sort of thing. All right, guys, so that's my long-winded rant on the benefits that I see in training no-gi jiu-jitsu. Don't worry, I will record a video where I talk about the many benefits of training in the gi, and I also think that it's very valuable for people that only train no-gi to put the gi on once in a while. I think it'll help them become more versatile and well-rounded. As always, leave a comment below if you liked the video. Let me know anything that I left out. Let me know some lessons that you've learned by training no-gi. If you have any questions that you'd like for me to try to address in a video response, you can leave them in the comments below, or you can find me on Instagram. You can DM me there at pfedmusic. I'm on here, I'm on Facebook, I'm all over the damn place, so find me wherever you can. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it, and I'll see you guys in the next one.